Hello out there, we're on the air, it's hockey night tonight.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the Light in the Lamp podcast. I am here with Steve, as always, and we've got a lot to get to today, so let's just jump right into it. We're going to start with some other league news, and then we're definitely going to jump into the Mike Babcock situation with the Toronto Maple Leafs. We're going to give that a majority of the time in the podcast, but let's start out with some other news. Let's start with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Get some bad news. Superstar Sidney Crosby out 6 weeks with core muscle surgery. For a team that really hasn't been lighting the league on fire, to lose a guy who's put up 17 points in Sidney Crosby, how do you think the team, specifically, how do you think they're going to have to overcome this? Do you see this roster being able to make up for what you lose in Crosby?
Well, when you're losing Crosby, no. But, had Nick Bjugstad not gotten injured, there'd be a chance where they still have a solid top six center. But then you lose Crosby and Bjugstad, and I'm pretty sure Alex Galchenyuk got hurt. Pretty much the Pittsburgh Penguins are decimated by injuries all at once. So their center depth is not there like we thought it was. And for a team that was really relying on the old school model of running with their two big horses of Evgeny Malkin and Sidney Crosby carrying the team, when you can't get both of them in the lineup at the same time at all this season, I think they played a combined 3 games together all season. It's tough. And in a division that's actually shaping up to be way more competitive than we thought it was going to be. I mean, certain teams that we thought were going to be competitive aren't. Like the Devils aren't competitive in the way we thought they were going to be.
Not even close.
Columbus is shaping up to be a lot tougher. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs still, but they're shaping up to be a lot tougher every night than they were going to be.
They look better than they are on paper.
Yeah, they're playing better, and that's John Tortorella. John Tortorella is playing to his roster, which is fine. But the Penguins really can't afford to, they've had a rough stretch. They went, I think, last week when they came into the game against the Rangers, they were 1-1-1 in their following games, and they've been on that similar trajectory. They've been winning one, losing one, winning one, losing one, win two, lose one. They're not making any headway because the teams in front of them are still winning. The Capitals are still winning, right? The Flyers are a lot better than everybody thought they're going to be. Carter Hart's been an absolute stud. I mean, it's just they're not... The Penguins are sitting in they're not even in a wild card, are they? Yeah, they're sitting in the first wild card. But they're only 1 point ahead of the Flyers and 2 points ahead of the Buffalo Sabres. And the Buffalo Sabres had one of the worst Novembers in the league. They had a phenomenal October. They were on fire, top of the almost on top of their division. And
that's almost exactly what happened last year.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they went something stupid 3-10-1 in November.
Yeah.
So it's for them to still only be 2 points back of the Penguins, who that's not a good sign. When a team is struggling and they still are within striking distance. I mean, Toronto struggling, 3 points back. Ottawa, terrible. Ottawa's an awful team. Ottawa's 4 points back.
And the Rangers are only 5 points back, and they have 2 games in hand.
Right, and Tampa Bay, one of the best teams in the league, one of the best rosters in the league. Tampa Bay is only 5 points back, and they've been struggling. So if they get hot, that's going to be tough. They're fighting all these teams in these other divisions, and then on top of that, their own division is a lot tougher than they thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing, right? I mean, we hear the narrative every time. Oh, when Crosby's hurt, Malkin only gets better, but Malkin doesn't have a guy like Kessel to play with this year. I mean, he's playing with guys like Brian Rust, and no offense to the guys I'm going to name, but Brian Rust is not Phil Kessel.
No, I mean they have Jake Gensel, who I like. Jake Gensel's still a really effective forward, but when you only have 2 guys in your top 6 right now who are the potential to hit the 40-goal mark, whereas if you had Crosby, you had 3, that's
And if you had still had Phil Kessel, you'd have 4. I mean, the team's just... I don't think the team is deep enough to sustain the offense without Sidney Crosby.
Yeah, I agree.
So, tough times for Penguins on that note. Another guy we're going to talk about before we jump into the Toronto nuclear meltdown is Corey Schneider has been waived by the New Jersey Devils. He cleared waivers. He's in the AHL now, making $6 million. He's the highest paid AHL player. Currently sitting at 33 years old. Had some injuries, came back. No wins this year with a 4.59 goals against and an .852 save percentage. I know the Devils haven't been good, but those numbers are not where they need to be. What are your thoughts on Corey Schneider?
Well, I think the Devils wasted Corey Schneider's best years, right? I mean, like, clearly he's not the goaltender they thought he was going to be, but, like, coming off of how many hip injuries, how many groin injuries over the last so many years, I mean, he went a whole year without winning a hockey game. He went a whole calendar year, not like a season, a whole calendar year without winning a single hockey game from January to January. That's insane. That doesn't happen in the NHL. Like, even if your team is bad, generally you can get a win out of that. But I mean, you can see it in the records. Like, I mean, yeah, he's like roughly 500 with the Devils in 2013, 2014, but he had a sub 2 goals against average. He was playing phenomenal. The next year, he has a losing record, has a 2.26 goals against average. The following year, he has a winning record, but only by 2 games. He's got a 2.15. And then he's got a losing record and a 2.82, and it just starts going up from there. And then that's when the injuries really start to take the toll. I think as the Devils teams got worse, he was still playing well, but I think eventually, like, he's 33 years old. That caught up to him. The shot volume he was seeing, the quality of shots he was seeing, the amount of games he was playing. I mean, 68 games, 58, 60. Like, he played a lot of games because he really didn't have a backup.
Well, and the other thing is he's playing a lot of games in front of a team that was just leaking shots and high quality chances.
An older, slow Devils team. This isn't the Devils team we're talking about this year, which has talent and speed that we were expecting them to be good. This is a team that still had
guys that are like over the hill, ending their career.
I mean, yeah, I don't even remember who was on those teams. They just weren't good. I just remember them being very, very bad.
Well, I mean, all you have to do is look at the record versus his stats. I mean, 16, 15, and 12 is okay. I mean, technically it's a NHL losing record because you have 27 losses between your regulation and overtime losses. Okay, sure. To only win 16 games out of 45 played when you have a 197 and a 921 and you have 3 shutouts. So roughly like a little bit less than 25% of your wins are because you got a shutout. The next year, plays 68 games, gets 26 wins with a 2.26 and a 9.25. I mean, what does that tell you? It tells you that he has no support.
I want to point out that Henrik Lundqvist in 2011, 2012 won the Vezina Trophy with numbers almost identical in goals against average and save percentage to Corey Schneider's, but he had the 35 wins.
Yeah.
So, Corey Schneider was putting up Vezina caliber numbers on a team that was terrible. So he was getting no press. Nobody was talking about it, but he was quietly one of the best kept secrets in the league. He was one of the best goaltenders in the NHL for a long time. So the Devils got what they traded for. Like, people talk about the Bo Horvat trade, they ended up with Bo Horvat as captain, this and that. It looks bad now, but for 3 years, I would argue for 4 years there, even when he had the 2.82 and the 9.08, those aren't great numbers, but they're still pretty serviceable. They're still pretty average numbers in the NHL. He was one of the better goaltenders in the league playing behind a team that was absolutely terrible. I mean, he won 26 games in 2014, 2015. He had 5 shutouts. 5 of those games he had to win on his own, pretty much.
Yeah.
And the following year,
almost 20% of your wins are your own.
And the following year, he wins 27 games. 4 of them are shutouts. Again, he has to win 4 games almost on his own. The team didn't score much. The team leaked shots. They were not good defensively.
No.
And he still was standing on his head, and I think that caught up to him. I think a lot of that really caught up to him. The miles that those teams put on him finally caught in his body, couldn't take it. I mean, it's like Corey Crawford in a lot of ways. Corey Crawford had a lot of miles on him, and those Blackhawk teams were not defensive stalwarts. They were run and gun, trade chances, and they won because they had Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves and Patrick Sharp in his prime. Yeah, they had good teams. And Corey Crawford, again, was he great? No, I would never say Corey Crawford was an elite NHL goaltender, but no. He was good enough. He was above average enough to sustain that level of success for them. And now he's old. His body couldn't keep up with him, and it's the same thing with Corey Schneider. His body can't keep up with him anymore. He's hurt. He's had so many injuries, and the injuries he's had are limiting his ability to play. Hip injuries, groin injuries, knee injuries. As a goaltender,
that's it.
The only thing that's worse would be concussion. You really
the leg. Once the legs start going, you don't move as well. And I mean, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. Unfortunately for the Devils, it just seemed like a mismatch between timing, because when Schneider was ready to play, the Devils weren't. Now the Devils are ready to play, and he's just not there. I mean, it's not where he needs to be.
I mean, Blackwood's been good for them. I mean, Blackwood's been a really big surprise. I mean, he's only 22. He's played well for them. He played well for them last year. He's played well for them this year. I mean, he took the starting job from Corey Schneider, which again is not to say it's through no fault of Corey Schneider's own, but This isn't like prime time Corey Schneider. This is like 33-year-old, busted up, banged up Corey Schneider. So like, not to be mean, but like it really wasn't going to take a lot to push him out of that number one job because he hadn't won a game. And Blackwood is essentially even. He's 7-4-3 on the season. He's 7-7 on the season, and his numbers are only. I mean, they're not slightly better. I mean, they're significantly better than Schneider's. I mean, Schneider's got an 85% save percentage. That's not like that's. No. There are nights where he looks like a college backup. Like, that's not good. But, I mean, even last year, he's 6-13-4 with a 306, and he still managed to put up a 900 save percentage. I mean, it's not great, but he hit league average.
It's just, it's a mismatch in timing between when the team is ready and when the goalie's ready. And then the thing that sucks is, look, I'm not going to excuse the Devils. It's not like Schneider's been the reason that they're so bad. I mean, structurally, this team they look lost. Is a mess. They're all over the place.
How many 3-goal leads have they blown this season to lose games?
Right. So, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's all Schneider's fault.
But they haven't gotten, it's a combination of things. They haven't gotten the goaltending they needed, but the structure's not there. So he's seeing a lot of really high-quality chances, and the Devils are blowing leads like crazy. Like, this team is imploding on a nightly basis.
They can't close out a game to save their life.
They were beating the Ottawa Senators 3-0 going to the third period last week and managed to lose the game. They had 1 period of hockey to play to win a hockey game.
Right.
Even if they don't give up 1 goal, 2 goals, you still win a hockey game. You don't implode to give up 4 goals and lose a game in 20 minutes. Like, that's absurd. And that's what keeps happening to them is they're putting together or they get blown out of the water in 2 periods and decide to play for 1 period, and it's not enough.
Run out of time. And it's just unfortunate because I feel like this Devils roster, talent-wise, could be competitive. But now the question becomes, now what do you do? Do you make a trade? I mean, there are certainly goalies on the market. I mean, we know that... I mean, look, let's be honest here. That LA Kings team is probably going to be sellers at the deadline. So you have a Jonathan Quick who you might get 1 or 2 more years out of him if you're looking for a rental just to kind of, give Blackwood a little bit more time to accommodate. Or, I mean, there are other guys, like I'm sure one of either Robin Leonard, probably not Robin Leonard because they gave him a contract, but maybe get Corey Crawford, maybe give, goalies that you're not going to get longevity out of, but maybe you give Blackwood, instead of starting him, because I don't think it's fair to just throw him into 65 games for the rest of the year. I don't think that's very fair to him.
I think this is exactly what we're talking about Corpusalo. Like, it's the same thing. Like, you don't want to throw a 22-year-old kid into the Wolves.
Right. So you get a goalie like a Crawford or a Quick who, at this point in the twilights of their career, you can start them for 40 games. In 2 years, Blackwood's 24. Now you can give him the reins.
I honestly even have, I think the perfect match and trading partners might be the Arizona Coyotes. They have Darcy Kemper and Antti Raanta, both of who are playing out of their minds right now.
Would probably be starting on most teams.
Right. So you probably aren't going to get Darcy Kemper out of there because I think he's entrenched himself as the number 1 right now. But, I think that's a really big match because Taylor Hall at this point is not staying in New Jersey.
He's gone. There's no way.
They're not competitive enough. They're not doing enough for him to stay. So I think that I wouldn't be surprised. I think that'd be a really big match because if Taylor Hall goes to Arizona, right? Arizona's got a really structured team. They're like the Islanders West. They're playing a really, really structured game. Their defense is really good. They're not giving up a lot of shots, and their goaltending is really good. They have some forwards. They have Phil Kessel. They have Clayton Keller. They have Derek Stepan. They have forwards who can put the puck in the net, but they're not going to light the league on fire. But then if you trade, Antti Raanta and you move a backup in, right, in theory, because then now you can just let Darcy Kemper play the 65 games that you would want instead of trying to rotate the 2 of them. And you add a Taylor Hall to that mix. Taylor Hall and Clayton Keller and Phil Kessel together, that's dangerous.
That's a scary.
You add a lot of speed and a lot of talent. And you have guys like Nick Schmaltz, who's playing out there. Guys that are unproven that, if given the opportunity, have been showing they can play it and produce. And then you just add Taylor Hall, bona fide, NHL superstar Taylor Hall,
35, 40 goal scorer Taylor Hall,
Hart Trophy winner Taylor Hall, carried the Devils to the playoffs. Taylor Hall with 95 points that year,
I mean, realistically, you could probably send Hall for Raanta, and you could probably get a pick out of it.
Yeah, a second or first round pick out of it.
And then, yeah, I mean, I hadn't even considered that, but honestly, that's a trade we could definitely be looking at come trade deadline because, I mean, look, I got to be honest with you here. I think even if the Devils somehow turn this around and they're in a playoff spot come trade deadline,
I still think you got to trade Taylor Hall.
I think Taylor Hall is going to walk to a Stanley Cup team. Because with the Devils being so inconsistent over the last few years, he's probably going to look at this and be like, well, is this success going to stay? Is it going to last? Are we going to be out of the playoffs again? I just think he's going to be gone. So I think your best bet is to probably try to trade him.
Well, I think teams are learning now that at the deadline, they don't want to end up like the Islanders with John Tavares. Like, that, like, not to like rub it in the Islanders' face, but like the idea that like they had the opportunity to trade him. He told them not to, but like to let a superstar center walk for nothing when in turn you got a king's ransom for him. Like,
Easily.
Franchise centerman. This is a franchise left winger. Like, you can get a king's ransom out of him, and there's a trading partner there that's perfect. I mean, even honestly, even the Edmonton Oilers are a significant trading partner that you could, in theory, go with. Because they have both Mikko Koskinen and Mike Smith, both of who are older, which isn't a long-term investment. It's like you said, you can have a guy like Mackenzie Blackwood play behind them while they take majority of the starts, and in 2-3 years, either one or if not both of them will be out of the league because they'll be too old. You can have Mackenzie Blackwood play, and ironically, you can have Taylor Hall go back to Edmonton and play and fill in a hole in the wing, so you don't have Zach Kassian playing in your top six anymore. Like,
Yeah.
there are fits here,
Yeah.
but I really think the fit in Arizona would be interesting because Arizona looks like the real deal, and if they add the level of point production from like somebody like Taylor Hall would give them, I think that makes them a really dangerous team in that Pacific Division.
They probably win the division at that point.
Right, I think so too. I mean, their back end's good. You know about Oliver Ekman-Larsson. You have Jacob Chikrin. Like, there are pieces there, and if you just add something like this might just put them over the top, and that's really it. This is what you've been talking about with the Islanders for years. They don't have a guy like that. They don't have
a bona fide 30 to 40 goal scorer.
I mean, does
power play
Anders
guy.
Does Anders Lee score 30 to 40 goals? Yeah, but he doesn't. He's not a shooter. He scores his goals from the front of the net. He's like Brendan Gallagher. It's a net front goal scoring. They don't have a guy like Tarasenko or Taylor Hall
or Stamkos, like these guys that are just gonna shoot the puck.
Even Artemi Panarin, a guy's gonna walk across the slot and just shoot and score goals. Like, they're gonna just rip it. Like, the team doesn't have that. And I think, like, the Islanders could be in the market. I mean, the Islanders don't have two goaltenders really anymore. I mean, they have Semyon Varlamov, and then next year, Sorokin's supposedly coming over after his KHL contract is over. So, in theory, a guy like Thomas Greiss might be out. You could trade a guy like Thomas Tripp, but that's divisional. I don't know if the Devils would want to trade Taylor Hall into their division.
I don't think so, just because I think they think they're going to be competitive with, the Subban and the Simmons deal. But
right, exactly. So, that's a match. That's, like, roster-wise, that's a match. I mean, I was watching... I think it's the TSN, like, they do this simulcast on the NHL Network every day at noon, so like a hockey lunch at noon or whatever it is, and they were talking about even like Montreal might be a fit, but I don't think you can get a goaltender out of Montreal because it's either Carey Price or Keith Kincaid, and Keith Kincaid who you've given up on
back, like
Keith Kincaid who you've given up on, I think prematurely anyway at that rate, but
yeah. So I mean, it's interesting. It's definitely something we will keep an eye on as far as trading partners go. But I mean, yeah, that's kind of the state of the Devils. Schneider's career is probably over. I don't see him really coming back from this. He's probably going to be a compliance buyout.
He had last year, I don't remember what the numbers were, but last year they sent him to the AHL. He came back and he won. I think he won like those 6 games all came after he came back from the AHL. And he looked significantly better. So maybe he goes down there, gets his game back, but is this going to be the story of every year? Like, are you going to have to send Corey Schneider through waivers every season so he can play against worse talent in the AHL to get his confidence back to come back to the NHL?
I think he's going to be bought out just because I think they're going to look at it as that's $6 million we can use elsewhere.
Somewhere else, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what's going on. That's Corey Schneider and the New Jersey Devils. So, all right. Let's get into it because this is the hottest topic in the National Hockey League. The Toronto Maple Leafs fire coach Mike Babcock.
Arguably the best coach in the NHL by some commentators.
After 4 full seasons and a little bit of this season, still had 3 years left on his coach contract. We're going to kind of run through this step by step here, but general thoughts, gut reaction to the Mike Babcock firing.
I mean, I wasn't surprised. I mean, I saw it, like, we've been talking about Mike Babcock on the hot seat for, 2 seasons now? Because the Toronto teams continue to underperform for him. And...
well, really, we started talking about it after they lost to Boston again last year.
Right, and I think, like, the coach coming into the season is, like, is Mike Babcock on the hot seat? Ding, ding, ding. Answer is yes. The woman from Ohio is correct. Yes, Mike Babcock was, in fact, on the hot seat. But I mean, I don't think this all doesn't fall on him. It doesn't.
No, absolutely not.
You can't this is what people don't understand. When you fire a coach, it's not it's not an indictment necessarily on the coach all the time. You just can't fire a team. Think about it. Like if a team is playing badly, you can't fire a team. The coach is the first guy to go because they're not responding to him or something, or it's just an easy excuse to fire a coach. I mean, St. Louis last year is an exception, right? That roster was good, and we knew that roster was good, and they underperformed. They fire Mike Yeo, who I think who I never thought was a great NHL head coach. He's a good assistant. He's a decent assistant coach for a lot of teams. He can do things like that, but his track record as a head coach is not good. Minnesota into St. Louis, not
Minnesota
very good.
was a disaster for him.
But yeah, I mean, and I'm telling you, he inherited a mess. He was there with this from the start to finish of that mess, and he's not even the finish. That is still a mess, but whatever. But then they fire him. You get Craig Berube in, and Craig Berube takes that team to a Stanley Cup. The Pittsburgh Penguins in 2008, they fire Michel Therrien, replace him with Dan Bylsma. They win a Stanley Cup. John Tortorella with the Rangers, they fire Tom Rennie, replace him. The Rangers don't go anywhere that year, but the following year the Rangers play for a Eastern Conference final. So it's like this has got a track record, but a lot of that, it wasn't the coach's fault. It's not that those were, and we're not a direct indictment on those coaches. The team just wasn't playing for them, so it was time to change something. And the easiest thing to change is a coach. You can't fire a team.
It's way easier, especially for a team like Toronto, who has the money to throw around. They don't care about paying Mike Babcock severance. They don't really.
Yeah,
they couldn't care any less about.
You're one of the wealthiest teams in the league.
Given how tight the team is to the cap, yeah, it's significantly easier to fire Mike Babcock than it is to make a trade right now.
Right.
Because if you're making a trade as Maple Leafs, you either have to get a player who's on a team-friendly deal, which, let's be honest here, they have pretty much the entire league's team-friendly deals right now, because to get a guy like Tyson Barrie for $3 million is a steal. To get Frederik Andersen on a contract they have him on is an absolute steal.
Even the Jake Muzzin contract is an absolute steal.
So it's not like this team doesn't have team-friendly contracts built into it already.
I mean, and let's not even to be cap compliant this year, they have 4 players on long-term injured reserve. They circumvented the cap just to be able to put this team on the ice every night.
Yeah, and it's so right. So I do want to talk about that. So my initial reaction was pretty much the same as yours. I was surprised at the timing. Yeah. I thought they were going to wait until at least after the road trip. I would have thought when they came back to Toronto, say, all right, let's get our ducks in a row, get our new coach a little bit of time. Because, I mean, to be fair to Sheldon Keefe, he was hired yesterday.
He didn't even have an NHL contract.
And full disclosure, this podcast is being recorded at around 8:30 Eastern time. So the Toronto Maple Leafs are in Glendale tonight. They're going to play the Coyotes. He hasn't even had a full 24 hours as the head coach before he has to step on the ice. So it's a very difficult position for him. So it's a very awkward time to be firing a coach mid-road trip.
I honestly thought they would have waited till at least Thanksgiving, because the NHL doesn't play. You don't play an American Thanksgiving most of the time.
Right.
So I mean the Canadian teams usually do, so that might not be the thing. But at least going into that, or any significant break in the schedule, I would have waited for. Not day before a game, game day. Like you're saying, that's really he's in a bad spot. He now has to fly from wherever he is.
He was in Toronto. He was coaching the Marlies.
Right. So he has to go from Toronto to Glendale to now acquaint himself with his team. That he has to now ice tonight against another team, and against a team that's red hot right now. He's in a bad spot.
So I thought the timing was weird. Am I surprised that he got canned? No. A lot of people are like, oh, I can't. Look, I mean, it was going to happen because the expectations for this team is Stanley Cup or bust. Yeah. If this team, I don't care if they go to Game 7 Stanley Cup Finals overtime. If this team loses and does not win a Stanley Cup, the season was a failure specifically because of the cap situation. You have almost $40 million tied up between 4 forwards, and I think we looked at it and they have, Tyson Barrie's contract is up. I think Kerfoot's on a 1-year deal.
I think Cece's contract comes up.
So this team does not have the leeway. This team is not going to be this raw talented next year. There's no way.
I mean, this looks like the Winnipeg Jets from a couple years ago when they lost in the Western Conference Final. That team was Stanley Cup or bust. Because even last year, the team was Stanley Cup or bust. Because coming into that year, it's like Jacob Trouba's contract was up. Dustin Byfuglien had his issues. They lose Ben Sherratt's contract comes up. Tyler Myers' contract comes up. And then what happens? They don't win a Stanley Cup. They don't even get out of the first round in that last year.
They're out in the first round.
And their blue line gets decimated. And they're not the team that they're not any closer to winning Stanley Cup now than they were then. And Toronto is running the risk of doing the exact same thing. They might lose 3 or 4 of their players on the blue line. I mean, they traded away a guy like a Nikita Zaitsev, who, like, let's not beat around the bush. Nikita Zaitsev wasn't exactly the best defenseman, but he's a number 3, number 4 defenseman on a good team. He could play in the top. He could play with Morgan Rielly if he really had to. But he brought a lot of snarl. He brought some size to that roster. He was like, I think he's 6'4". He's a big guy. Moved the puck pretty well. Could skate pretty well. You move him out, so you lose him. And then in the coming off season, you run the risk of losing Ceci, Barry, Muzzin for nothing.
Right, and so, am I surprised that they fired the coach in such a pivotal season? No, because it is Stanley Cup or bust for this roster. I just thought the timing was not great. So if we take a look at the stats in the Mike Babcock era, I mean, he's had some pretty successful teams, but I know you have a lot of opinions on the way that the team was supposed to be playing versus the way they played. So let's talk about the player side, because we're going to hit all three. We're going to hit the player side of it, the coach's side of it, and the GM side of it. Actually, we're going to try the GM side of it now. From the GM side of it, this roster that he built is theorized on puck possession, skill, and speed. I mean, you can see it up and down the lineup. There's nobody on this team outside of Jake Muzzin who really plays with a lot of bite, doesn't play with a lot of grit and sandpaper. Up and down the lineup, down to your fourth line with Jason Spezza, it's a skill-based hockey team. And they're not doing that. I mean, their giveaways to takeaway percentage has gotten significantly worse and worse and worse over the course of the year. Their percentage right now is sitting at 58%, which means they're giving up the puck almost twice as much as they're taking it away. And they're not playing possession hockey. Even their power play, with a team that's as skilled as this, their power play is only 17% right now. And their penalty kills is just atrocious.
Their penalty kill is about on par with the Rangers. And the Rangers are a team that everybody knew couldn't defend this year.
So I do want to hear your thoughts on, is this a roster that was... We're going to get to, is this a roster that's built for Babcock, but is this a roster that was built to succeed?
I think this is a new age NHL roster. This roster is really like a petri dish. This was a testing ground for the idea that, like, you don't have to, if you have the puck all the time, you win, right? And that sounds like stupid. It sounds like a novel idea. Oh, if you have the puck more, you're going to win. But if you look at a lot of teams that have been successful, let's look at the Edmonton Oilers in the 80s, right? They always had the puck. They scored a lot of goals, but they could still defend. They still had guys that could play defense. So the roster constructed. I mean, Marty McSorley was on that roster. Like, there were guys that were whole purpose was not just to put the puck in the net. This idea of all 4 lines being fast and skilled is a pretty new idea in the NHL. Because even the Penguins teams in 2016 and 2017 that won the Stanley Cup, their top 9 could score, but the bottom 3, they were not meant to go out there and score goals. They were spark plugs. They were sent to go out there, hit guys, kill penalties, those kinds of things. This Toronto team doesn't have that. They're really built to score. They're built to score a lot of goals, and I mean they're doing it. I mean, their goals for per game is middle of the NHL. It's not great, but I mean they're scoring over 3 goals a game. So in theory, they can score goals. I mean, they're not the Nashville Predators who are averaging over 4 goals per game. That was really awful to say because there's too many 4s in there, but whatever. And like you said, their power play percentage is not good. It's like 17%. This is a team that really, in theory, should have
the best power play in the league.
Yeah, I mean, you can put Austin Matthews, William Nylander, Mitch Marner, Morgan Rielly, and John Tavares on the ice all at the same time. There's no reason you're not scoring goals.
Well, and that's another thing I do want to hear more from you. But before that, I don't want to hear the excuse, oh, they've had injuries, oh, Tavares was hurt, Marner's hurt. I don't care if Tavares was hurt and Marner was hurt. Let's you take John Tavares out of that equation, you still have Matthews, Marner, and Nylander. You take Marner out of the equation, you still have Matthews, Tavares, Nylander,
Kapanen,
Morgan Rielly, Cody Ceci, Tyson Barrie. The injuries to them, it's like if a guy was 6'9", and you chopped a piece of his foot off, and now he's only 6'8". He's still a big dude. This roster, you take any of those guys out, is still player for player one of the most talented rosters in the league. So let's not use the injury excuse.
I mean, it's not like one of the teams that can use the injury excuse was the team we just talked about, the Pittsburgh Penguins. That's different. That they're not the Pittsburgh Penguins team that they were. Like them losing,
and they still have a better record than the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, them losing Sidney Crosby for extended periods of time is tough. Them not having Malkin in the lineup for a long period of time at the beginning of the season was tough. But they're still winning games. The Maple Leafs lost John Tavares, and you still had Austin Matthews, who's one of he's not leading the league, but he was leading the league in goals for a while there. I think he had 13 goals in like 15 games or something stupid. Like, you still had Austin Matthews putting the puck in the net every single night, but you're still losing games.
This team arguably has a top 10 player at every position, which I almost no other team in the league can say. You have a top 10 player in Frederik Andersen. I don't think anybody's going to take that away from him. Arguably, you have 2 or 3 top 10 forwards between Matthews, Tavares, and Marner.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, even if you want to go top 20, you're probably throwing Nylander in there somewhere. And on defense, you have Morgan Riley, who's arguably, I would say, not even arguably, it is a top 10 player.
He's arguably a top 5 defender in the league.
There are not a lot of teams. I think really the only team off the top of my head that I can think of that can say that is maybe the Capitals and the Bruins.
Yeah.
Having a top 10 player at every position. And this team has multiple top 10 players at forward.
Yeah.
There's no excuse. I don't care if you're missing a key piece here and there on the, up front. There's no excuse.
I mean, they just... I think the theory is proving that, like... I think Mike Babcock was trying to use the roster in a way that it wasn't designed to be used. He was expecting them to play, like... He was going to play more traditional hockey. And I don't think Kyle Dubas built the roster to play that.
Okay, I do want to talk about that. Let's go into that. Was this roster built for Mike Babcock, or do you think this roster was built knowing that eventually Babcock was not going to be the coach?
I think it's the latter rather than the former. Because, like, Lou Lamoriello hired Mike Babcock. Brendan Shanahan and Lou Lamoriello hired Mike Babcock. Lou Lamoriello left the Toronto Maple Leafs. I mean, he got moved to an advisory position, then he quit. There was a lot of controversy involved in that too. Comes to the Islanders, right? Brings Barry Trotz with him. But Toronto, now Kyle Dubas is named GM and inherits Mike Babcock. And Kyle Dubas is young. I think he's in his 30s.
He's very young, very young.
I think he's like 33, 34.
He's probably, I think he's either the youngest or like the second
youngest. Him and John
Chaika
out in Arizona are two of the youngest GMs in the league. Whereas John Chaika looks like he built the roster for the coach he has in Rick Tocchet. And whereas Kyle Dubas built the roster he wanted, regardless of who was behind the bench. I don't think he was consulting Mike Babcock on personnel decisions for the most part. And let's not beat on the bush. Mike Babcock and Kyle Dubas have had a checkered relationship. They don't seem to like one another.
Well, all you have to do is read Babcock's parting statement, where he makes no mention of Kyle Dubas and no mention of Brendan Shanahan.
Right. I don't think he has so much of an issue with Brendan Shanahan as much as he has with Kyle Dubas. I think
he probably has an issue with Shanahan just by proxy of
what happened.
Shanahan being Dubas's
boss.
Yeah, or the other way around. Dubas is Shanahan's. No, Shanahan's Dubas's boss.
Yeah, he's the president.
So he has a problem with Shanahan by proxy, not really personally, but still.
I mean, like, and it's been over the course of years. There's been public flare-ups in that like in the media between the two of them, and I think Mike Babcock really got the short end of the stick here. I mean, you have a GM who's building a team that he wants without regards to who you want or what kind of play style you want or the systems you want to implement. He's not even consulting you. He's just putting team players on your roster, and you have to make the best of it you can with it. And to be fair, for 2 years he did. I mean, he iced a team that won. What did they win? They won 49 games last year. They won 105 points. They got knocked out in the first round, but like he made the best of what he could. But this year, it was too much. Like, the team isn't playing well. I mean, to be fair, the team got a whole new look on the back end, and they losing Nazem Kadri, trading for Tyson Barrie really changed the whole complexion of the team. But the complexion that it changed was Kyle Dubas built a soft team for a guy that likes to play hard nosed, like grindy, not grindy, but not that Mike Babcock doesn't like skill, right? Mike Babcock has coached some of the best players in the league in the last so many years. He coached Pavel Datsyuk, Henrik Zetterberg, Gustav Nyquist, Nick Lidstrom, like guys that could score, and they were successful. But that wasn't the whole team. He didn't have 4 Pavel Datsyuks on the wings or 4 Henrik Zetterbergs. Like, And while Henrik Zetterberg and Pavel Datsyuk are two of the best 200-foot players in the league at the time, having 4 of them isn't good. I don't care who you are. Having 4 of any kind of one kind of player is bad, and the Toronto Maple Leafs have 12 of the same kind of forward.
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about that, because a lot of noise has been made about the roster and its makeup, and how soft it really is. How much of that do you think has an impact on where the team's sitting at right now? That lack of snarl and that lack of bite.
I just think they're not hard to play against. Teams are having an easy time walking all over because they know they can swing the momentum of the game if they just start playing physical against the Maple Leafs, because they're going to slow them down. And once you slow down the Maple Leafs, they can't go toe-to-toe with you in that kind of game. They don't want to play that way.
Well, I mean, they're not going to respond. I mean, all you had to do is look at those 2 back-to-back games where Matthews gets popped into neutral zone and then Barry catches an elbow in the neutral zone and nobody did anything.
Nobody even batted an eye. Like, they didn't even think to get up and try to do anything about it.
I mean, even your grit and sandpaper guy, Jake Muzzin, just skated away.
Right. I mean, and if you look at the other teams in their division, you look at the Boston Bruins. Look at the Boston Bruins from last year. Stanley Cup, Game 7 Stanley Cup Boston Bruins, right? That roster was hard to play against. Their top line is arguably the best line in the league. Their second line's good with David Krejci and Jake DeBrusk. But then you have Nola Chari, Jacob Chernak. Like, you have guys on that roster that can still play, and they're playing heavy games. And that's what I say, like, even David Pastrnak and Patrice Bergeron play a heavy game. They're a big, heavy team, and they're hard to play against. The Maple Leafs aren't hard to play against. None of the guys in that top 6 play that kind of game, and that's fine. But nobody in the bottom 6 does either. Nobody's going in there and forechecking. Nobody's going in there and throwing the big hit. Nobody. If you're losing a game and you have you need a momentum swing, you don't have a guy on the ice you can throw on the ice to go out there and throw a big hit and change the momentum of the game, or start a fight and change the momentum of the game. You had that in Nazem Kadri last year. I mean, Nazem Kadri's not exactly a fighter, but he's a gamer. He'll go out there and he'll do it. I mean,
he's a pest.
Yeah.
But you need a guy like that.
Whereas this year, I mean, like you said, Austin Matthews gets popped, and then he gets popped up high in the neutral zone, and then you have Tyson Barrie gets elbowed in the head, and nobody does anything. That changed the momentum, the complexion of both those games, because those teams knew they could walk all over the Maple Leafs.
Well, all you have to do is look at the guys who are the bottom 6 guys in terms of ice time for this Maple Leafs team on average. Ilya Mikheyev, Alexander Kerfoot, Trevor Moore, Jason Spezza, Frederick Gauthier, Devin Shore, and Timashov. Absolutely none of these guys play a bottom 6 type game.
No.
They're all fast, they're all young, they're all skilled players. I mean, Jason Spezza's not out there laying people out in the corner, you know? Neither is Frederick Gauthier. I mean, I love the way Frederick Gauthier plays because he goes to the net, but he's not a guy that you have to be afraid of. I mean, when you're playing a team like the New York Islanders, best 4th line in hockey, are they the best 4th line in hockey because they score a ton of goals? No. I mean, Casey Zizekas scored 20 goals last year. He's never going to do that again. But they're still the best 4th line in hockey because, you know, Martin's going to throw a hit. Clutterbuck's going to throw a hit. Zizekas is going to grind it out in the corner and go into the trenches. This 4th line, they're not going to match up against anybody. I mean, you know, like even like the, you know, you were mentioning Nazem Kadri was their matchup center. Who on this team can you really be a matchup player?
You don't want John Tavares matching up. You don't want Austin Matthews matching up. Like, you don't want to throw a guy like Austin Matthews out there have to play against their top line and worry about playing defense when you need Austin Matthews to score goals. Same thing with John Tavares.
And I pulled something interesting because I agree with you. I think this roster was absolutely not built with Mike Babcock in mind. And I think this past offseason is probably the nail in the coffin for that theory. Because this past offseason, if this was a roster built with Mike Babcock in mind, you're not trading for Tyson Barrie. You're not trading a guy like Zaitsev for Tyson Barrie. Or, you know, essentially a trade. Not the actual trade, but
you're not switching them out in your lineup.
You're not trading away a guy like Nazem Kadri. And I get it that there was cap implications in these moves, but you're finding a way to make it work.
Yeah, but you're also not, even if you do have to trade away like Nazem Kadri, you're not trading him away to bring in a skilled defenseman. You trade him for a player of similar ilk.
And you're not getting rid of a guy like Jake Gardiner for, you know, again, a Tyson Barrie or, you know, a Cody Ceci. If this was a roster built for Mike Babcock, you would see guys like, and not these guys specifically because of the cap problems, I understand that, but guys in the vein of a Jacob Trouba or a Tyler Myers would be coming in, or a Marcus Johansson who went to the Sabres. Those are the kind of guys that Mike Babcock can coach. Because, I mean, I pulled up something here. We were looking at the 2007-2008 Detroit Red Wings roster, okay? Stanley Cup champion team. And before anyone says it, I don't think it's unfair to compare this Maple Leafs roster to that Detroit Red Wings roster, because this Maple Leafs roster is supposed to be competing for a Stanley Cup.
Right.
If you look at the ice time for these guys, Nick Lidstrom wasn't exactly a big hitter. He was a very skilled defenseman, but he was hard to play against because he was strong on his stick and he was a big guy. Who's your second most ice time? Oh, Brian Rafalski. Who's third? Oh, Nick Kronwall. Who's fourth? Brad Stewart. Chris Chelios is on this team.
I mean, Andres Lilia.
Like, let's go to the forwards. Okay, who's most in the forwards? All right, you're Zetterberg. Datsuk is number 1 and 2. Who are your next 3 guys? Franzen, Holmstrom, Cleary. Who else was on this team? Chris Draper was on this team. Darren McCarty was on this team.
Yuri Hoodler. Kirk Maltby, Dallas Drake.
Like, and these guys didn't even throw a lot of hits because the 2007-2008 Red Wings team was 25th for hits. So it's not necessarily about guys that hit a lot, but these are guys that are hard to play against because they're big. They grind you down in a corner. They get in the trenches and wear you down that way. Not necessarily even hits, although hits help for sure. But this was a hard team to play against because they would go into the corner. They'd win that puck battle. They'd get the puck back. I mean, they were first in the league for shots against for games played. And this is a Mike Babcock roster. If Kyle Dubas was building a Mike Babcock roster, you're moving a guy like Jake Gardiner for a Tyler Myers or a Jacob Trouba.
Or you're trading Kadri and you're trying to bring in a guy like a guy in a similar ilk to. I mean, who did Justin Falk get traded for? Justin Falk got traded for
Joel Edmondson.
You would bring in a guy like Joel Edmondson, big, can play in his own end, decent puck mover, not exactly going to light the league on fire with points, but he's hard to play against. He's big and he's good. He plays in his own end.
You'd be making moves for guys that are hard to play against, but instead, what are you bringing in? Skill, and more skill.
And I think the other issue with the Mike Babcock, the idea that it wasn't built for him, is that he likes to play a shot-suppressing game. His teams are hard to play against. He forces things to the wall, and they grind it out along the walls. He lets skill shine. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, Pavel Datsuk and Henrik Zetterberg are on this roster, but they were good at suppressing shots. I mean, goals against per game, 2.18, first in the NHL. The year before that, they weren't. I mean, the Maple Leafs are one of the worst, 3.43, 24th in the league. There's only 31 teams in the league. There's only 8 other teams that are worse. Or 7 other teams that are worse. The team that loses in the Stanley Cup final was 19th in the league. That's not great, but I mean, this Maple Leafs team is not good at suppressing shots, and it's because of the makeup of the team. They're not meant to suppress shots. This team's meant to have the puck all the time, and when they don't have the puck, there's no way for them to stop the other team from doing what they want to do. Even structurally, like, Mike Babcock is known for his structure. He's a great coach. He's known for having strategies and ideas on how to defend teams. But with the players he has, it's really hard for him to do any of that because nobody's going to go out there and grind it out and suppress the shots or forecheck or keep the puck. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. Those Detroit Red Wings teams were possession-driving teams. They had the puck most of the time. That's really what it is. Like, so I don't want to hear the argument that this team, they need the puck all the time. Yeah, that Red Wings team had the puck all the time too, but when they didn't have the puck, they could defend. This Maple Leafs team doesn't have the puck all the time, can't defend, and that's a recipe for disaster.
Well, let's just compare the defense because that's a big thing. I mean, you can compare Riley to Lidstrom, although Lidstrom was leagues better in his own zone.
Lidstrom's a first ballot Hall of Famer,
but they're similar ilk, okay. But then you have Rafalski, Kronwall, and Brad Stewart, who were big, tough guys to play against. CC, no. Muzzin, yes. Barry, absolutely not. Barry's 5'11", like 190 pounds. He's not hard to play against, okay. Yeah, so and the issue is when the Leafs don't have the puck, they don't have the big defenseman to block that shot or box the guy out.
Or separate the guy from the puck to get the puck back.
I mean, if you watch the Leafs play, a lot of their goals are coming from the slot. Why is that? Well, what I've been noticing about the Leafs is that they're not engaging. The defense is not tying a guy's stick up at the front of the net. They're just letting him sit there. Why? Because they're getting boxed out by guys like Brad Marchand or Brendan Gallagher or Alexander Barkov or, a Marcus Johansson. They're not engaging. The sticks aren't tied up. The shots from the slot are coming. And I've also started to notice Frederik Andersen doesn't trust his defense anymore. I'm sorry. He just does not. If you watch the way Frederik Andersen is playing, and you guys know me at this point, I pay a lot of attention to goaltenders. I'm no expert on goaltending, of course, but if you watch the way he's played, when you watch that game against the Boston Bruins where Marchand scored that goal like a minute into the third period, where he beat Riley wide, which was embarrassing for Morgan Riley, by the way, the announcers were like, oh, why was Frederik Andersen coming off the post so early? You know why? Because he was expecting that pass across to make it across the other guy. And that happened again in the slot where Frederik Andersen came off his post too early. Why? Because he knew the guy in the slot was wide open. He doesn't trust his defense anymore. And for a top 10 goalie, when you don't trust your defense to be stopping these passes, you're toast. Because now you feel like you have to make up for that. And now you're trying to basically play goalie and defense. Because why? Because this team is not built to play in their own end.
No. Now let's think about it. Even if they do, when they do play well, and the Maple Leafs do a good job of keeping players to the outside and the shots coming from the outside, they're not good at cleaning up.
No.
The shot comes in and usually ends up in the back of their net because they're not good. They're not engaging. They're letting guys open. Guys are unmarked in the slot by themselves constantly. And it just because the team's thinking go, go, go all the time. And let's not even mention, the team thinking go, go, go all the time. The neutral zone turnovers, the turnover rate must be something absurd.
Oh, that turnover the other night that Barry had in the neutral zone against the Golden Knights was awful. Yeah. I mean, he tried to skate it up and make a play when he was the last guy back. You never do that. And I do want to ask you a question on that. Do you think that at some point this team and the roster quit on Mike Babcock?
I think at some point they might have, because I think they weren't getting the results they wanted. And at some point, I think Mike Babcock, he's hard to play for. Mike Babcock's demanding coach. He's very but you cannot like a coach. I mean, nobody liked playing for Scotty Bowman. Everybody will agree and say Scotty Bowman was an asshole and nobody liked playing for him. But he's the greatest coach to ever play because he knew how to get the best out of his players. I mean, Mike Babcock knows how to get the best out of his players, and he's done it for 3 years here in Toronto, when they were competitive teams. I mean,
he's one of the best coaches in the league.
Right. Exactly, and this isn't change. He's gonna get a new job almost immediately. I don't think Mike Babcock's gonna be without a job very long. So I mean, are there other struggling coaches in the league? That's up for debate. I mean, could he go back to Detroit? I mean, Jeff Blashill's kind of just Mike Babcock 2.0. He's the same kind of guy. But that's neither here nor there. But the team isn't built for him. I think the team at some point realized they weren't built for him, and they quit on him. And that's not fair to him because he's not getting the effort out of his players. So of course it's going to reflect badly on the coach. And sometimes it just happens. Sometimes a coach loses touch with his roster, but I don't think he lost touch with his roster. I just don't think this roster and him ever had any connection at all because I don't think they knew how to play for him. I don't think he knew how to use them effectively because I don't think he knew where he was going to get any of that
sandpaper.
Right. And that's characteristic of Mike Babcock teams.
I was going to say, I don't think it's that he necessarily lost touch. It's I don't think they were ever touching to begin with.
Right.
This roster was never in sync with what Mike Babcock wanted. But I do think this roster quit on Mike Babcock. And one of the key things that really stood out to me is in the midst of this losing streak, so I forget who they were playing, but somebody scores an empty net goal. Tavares snaps his stick on the post and then apologized for it after the game. You know what that tells me? That tells me that, and that was the only sign of frustration basically that we saw out of that team. When you're a Stanley Cup or an allegedly Stanley Cup contending team in the midst of a 6-game losing streak, your head coach is probably on the chopping block. You'd think you'd see some emotion. You'd think you'd see, and I'm a guy that I like seeing players get mad. I want to see somebody breaking their stick. I want to see somebody yelling on the bench. You know why? Because that tells me that you're engaged. That tells me that you care about the outcome of the game.
You think when you know your coach's job's on the line, you'd want to play for him.
Right. But the fact that Tavares breaks his stick and then apologizes for it tells me that he probably doesn't care. Was he mad that they lost that game? Yeah. But you know what would have showed me that anybody on this roster cared? I would love to have seen John Tavares go out there and just dummy someone in the neutral zone. I wanted to see Austin Matthews go out there and maybe he chucks Nux. I mean, we saw it the other night with Jack Eichel. Jack Eichel fought against Minnesota Wild because he cares. He was mad that they were losing, and he's annoyed that they're in the midst of this losing streak. Nobody on the Leafs even cares. I mean, yeah, do you want Tavares fighting? Maybe Knox has a broken thumb. Why don't Matthews get into a scrap? Find somebody in his weight class. Why doesn't a guy like Morgan Riley rough somebody up, or Cody Ceci rough somebody up? Take a roughing penalty. Take it unsportsmanlike. Do something. Everyone's just checked out. They clocked out as soon as the game started, and they don't care anymore. And that's not fair to Mike Babcock. I mean, it's almost like trying to coach. It's almost like trying to teach, high school math when nobody cares. Nobody's learning anything in that classroom because everyone wants to go home.
Exactly.
And that's not fair. I mean, where's the emotion on this team? I mean, for God's sake, like, somebody do something, And
I think that really is the tragedy of it all, is that Mike Babcock really wasn't. I mean, was he perfect? No. But was he the whole problem? No.
Was it Mike Babcock's fault that Morgan Riley is playing like the softest defenseman on the team right now?
No.
I mean, what is he supposed to do? You're supposed to get him in the gym?
Yeah, you can't bench him. Like, you can't.
It's just, there's a lot of things that really bothered me with the way the team responded.
I think it's real. I honestly think this is really. It was really, for lack of a better term, shitty of Kyle Dubas to have done this to Mike Babcock in the first place. If you knew you weren't going to build a roster for him, and you knew you weren't going to have a team that plays the way he likes to play, the very least you could have done was relieved him of his coaching duties after the Boston series last year. This way, you have a reason. It's like, we keep losing to Boston. If they're not responding to him, fine, he's gone. But then you don't. But it's not like that would have at least been like, there's some accountability there. He couldn't get them over the hump. Fine, whatever. You need a change of scenery. Sometimes you just need a change of the coach. But like, this isn't saying they need a change of a coach. They need a change of a coach because the roster isn't even like, he wasn't even in the game plan for this roster.
No.
Kyle Dubas had his eyes set on replacing Mike Babcock almost immediately upon taking the GM job. And I think that's really, really unfair.
I totally agree. I think that this was never meant to be a Babcock team, and all you have to do to see that is look at the offseason moves they made and compare a Babcock team to the team that he was given. And it's not fair. It's like putting, it's like putting a star running back on a team where you're running maybe 10 running plays a game. It's just not fair. It doesn't work. And right. I think Kyle Dubas really dropped the ball in this one. But he does get his man in there, so Sheldon Keefe comes in. A little bit of backstory on Sheldon Keefe. Him and Kyle Dubas go way back, which is, again, another reason why I think that this was inevitable. They've been together since Sheldon Keefe was in Sault Ste. Marie. But Sheldon Keefe was in the CCHL. He won like 5 straight championships in the CCHL. Goes to Sault Ste. Marie, is a winning coach there. Goes to the AHL, wins a Calder Cup with the Toronto Marlies. So, yeah, does he have a winning culture about him? Yes.
I think he's earned his. It's not like he got the job just by knowing. He's earned this job, but
again, I mean, you really can't say, oh, this is going to bring a winning culture to Toronto because you had Mike Babcock, who's one of the best coaches in NHL history.
Stanley Cup champion Mike Babcock.
But Sheldon Keefe does have a history of winning championships. He comes onto the team. He was with Kyle Dubas in the Sioux. He was with Kyle Dubas in Toronto Marlies. Comes in, and now he's the coach. And his teams do have a penchant for run and gun, fast style hockey. How do you feel about Sheldon Keefe? Do you feel like maybe they should have gone with a more established NHL coach? Because Sheldon Keefe's a rookie. This is going to be his first foray into the NHL.
I think this was the coach for the team. This was the team this team was built for Sheldon Keefe. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind at this point that Kyle Dubas, like I said, it was inevitability that Kyle Dubas was going to fire Mike Babcock. I think he could have done done him the courtesy of firing him over the summer and bringing Sheldon Keefe in, because then at least Sheldon Keefe has time to acclimate himself to the roster. Now you're throwing him into the fire. I mean, rookie NHL coach has to coach his first game less than 24 hours after getting the job. I mean, he signed his first NHL coaching contract today.
Right.
Like, so before that, he didn't even have an NHL coaching contract. He never set foot on an NHL bench. I mean, like you said, he has a winning culture about him. He's got a winning track record. He's done good everywhere he's went. The teams he traditionally has are run and gun, a lot of offense. So I think, I mean, this team is built to play that way, trade chances, and just rely on your goaltender and score a lot of goals. So I think he should, in theory, have a lot of success with the Toronto Maple Leafs roster. He might get them over the hump. But I don't think that's an indictment on I don't think any of it's an indictment on Mike Babcock. Like, he couldn't get them over the hump because the team isn't even his at that point. Like, the players aren't playing for him. The GM doesn't want him. Like,
well, let me ask you this. Do you think that perhaps a guy like Sheldon Keefe, who is a bit more flexible in his game plan, is going to be able to make up for the obvious lack of snarl, bite, grit, sandpaper on this team? Or do you think that this is a roster deficiency that needs to be addressed?
I mean, I think it's a roster deficiency that needs to be addressed at some point. Like, I mean, St. Louis and Boston played for a Stanley Cup, and those are two big, heavy teams, and there was a lot of bite in those teams. The teams that went far, like, even the Washington Capitals got knocked out in the first round, but even that team's got bite. I mean, the Columbus Blue Jackets have bite.
Well, it's funny because we were actually talking about the parallels between this roster and the Lightning roster of last year, where the Lightning roster of last year, I mean, really outside of a guy like maybe Ryan McDonough or Victor Hedman, didn't have a lot of bite either. And where did that end up? Where did that lead them to?
A sweep in the first round against a team that they looked confused and they had no idea how to play against it. Because they had no answer. Once Columbus got physical, they had no answer. The Bruins are the same. It was the same thing with the Maple Leafs and the Bruins. Once the Bruins got physical, the Maple Leafs had no answer. The Maple Leafs, when they wanted to skate, outskated the Bruins. They were faster, they were more talented, and they were arguably a better hockey team on talent alone. The Bruins, in reality, are a better hockey team. They're better composed. There's a better makeup, and it's a good match between their coach and their players. I mean, Claude Julien was not a good match anymore. They get rid of him because he doesn't like to play a fast game. You bring in, I can't remember his name, but I can see his face, the coach of the Bruins.
Cassidy?
Yeah, Bruce Cassidy. And he adds an up-tempo element to their game, and the Bruins, but he keeps that, like, traditional Boston Bruins hockey involved, and that's in their DNA. And what happens? They play for a Stanley Cup. Like, this Maple Leafs team has no hope of going anywhere unless they add some kind of X factor. They don't have an X factor. There isn't anything. Like, Ryan Callahan played on that Tampa Bay team last year. Ryan Callahan in his prime was that guy for the Rangers. Those Rangers teams in the 2011, 2012, like when they were competitive, he was the guy. Like, they had that. They had him. They had Dan Girardi. You had Mark Stahl. You know, Brendan Prust. Mike Rupp was on that team. Like, these were guys who were going to go out there, and they were hard to play against, and there was a lot of bite in that roster.
Well, look at the Blues. I mean, Ryan O'Reilly was exactly the type of player that they needed.
Right.
Top six forward, could win the face-off, played with a lot of heavy, physical hockey. Exactly the type of guy that you're talking about.
But he had the finesse to put the puck in the net. Like, the Maple Leafs don't have it. They just don't. And like you said, they have multiple top 10 players at forward, a top 10 defenseman, and a top 10 goalie in the NHL. That's a recipe for success. Like you said, the only other team I can think of is like the Washington Capitals, who have Kuznetsov, Ovechkin, and Backstrom, and Oshie up front. They have John Carlson and Braden Holtby. Like, that's another team I can think of that's got players of that caliber at every position. So there's no reason this Maple Leafs team should be losing the way it is, but the roster construction I think the theory failed. Like, the idea of the puck possession speed team failed. There's some level, no matter how much you want to innovate at the NHL level, right? You want to change the game. Hockey is a very simple game. You have the puck, you don't have the puck, you get the puck. But if all your players want the puck and all your players aren't going to go in there and get the puck, like, then
who's winning that corner battle?
Right.
You know?
Like, if you don't have the puck, someone's got to get the puck. But if you consistently don't have the puck, you're not going to win the game when your whole team is built on constantly having the puck. And that's just the reality of it.
Yeah, and the unfortunate part for the Maple Leafs is it's not an easy fix, again, because of the cap situation. This is a very difficult puzzle because it's almost like the Rubik's Cube where there's like, you have everything all together except that one square. But to get that one square to the side that it needs to be on, you have to move 13 different pieces.
Right.
I mean, this is a difficult roster. I did hear somebody said, let's be honest here. If they're trading anyone out of their top 6, it's probably Nylander at this point. You're not trading Marner. You're not trading Matthews. You're not trading Tavares.
No.
Marner carries that $6.9 million cap hit, so you can get a decent player out of that.
Nylander, yeah.
But then the issue becomes, where do you send him? What do you get back for him? And it's just, I think Sheldon Keefe is going to be successful with this roster because this is built for him. Let's not beat around the bush. But do I think this team, I said at the beginning of the year, I think this team was going to compete, and I think I said they were going to win a Stanley Cup. I 100% rescind that. I don't think this team is going to get past the second round of the playoffs. They might be like the Colorado Avalanche where they can score their way into the second round, but they're not getting any further than that.
No.
Do I think Keefe is the right guy? Do I think they could have gone with somebody with more experience? I think Dubas is taking a big gamble here because if Keefe flounders and fails behind the bench, who's the next guy up? Who do you look at now? Oh, well, Kyle Dubas put this guy in. Why didn't Dubas go with a more experienced coach? Now Dubas' head is on the chopping block. So he's taking a big risk. I mean, he's got his guy, but he's taking a big risk here.
I think the other thing that the problem is just Dubas in general, and his theory is Dubas is very new age hockey, very advanced stats driven. Advanced stats don't tell the whole story of a hockey game. It really doesn't. No. Hockey is not like baseball where you can quantify almost everything that happens on the field because baseball isn't a fluid sport. There's a pitch, either it's a strike, or it's a ball, or he hits it. That's it. Those are the only 4 outcomes of that entire interaction.
It's a series of events,
Hockey, it's like he gets on the ice, he passes the puck, he turns it over. Does he get the puck back? Does he not get the puck back? And then what happens after that? And what is everybody else on the ice doing concurrent to what he's doing?
Because there's 9 other players on the ice.
Right. Baseball, who gives a hell? Who gives a damn what the shortstop's doing? Because he's just waiting. Everybody's just waiting for the pitcher to do something. In hockey, that doesn't happen. So you can't quantify the sport in the exact same way. If you watch any baseball, you see they talk about their advanced stats and their sabermetrics and all these crazy things, and you can use Moneyball to build a roster. You can't really do it in hockey because in Moneyball, it's all right, the idea is you get players on base, you get the ball in play. Hockey doesn't work. It's a very easy, you can see all the how it works. Hockey doesn't work that way. There's no advanced stats that's going to tell you the whole story of a game. A guy like Ryan Callahan was an X factor. No, you can't quantify the heart that guy had, that he went out on the ice and he laid it all on the line for teams. I mean, he'd go out there and block a shot. I remember it ruined the Rangers' playoff run one year. Last game of the season, I think it was 2011, he goes out there, blocks a Zdeno Chara slap shot, shatters his ankle, out for the whole playoff run. Rangers never recovered. That was their captain. Losing that was tough. But you can't quantify his ability to get in front of that shot and block it, and at the risk of his body. But that has an uplifting effect on a roster. Nobody in Toronto is going to go out and do that. You're going to see Austin Matthews go out there and slide. And this isn't a knock on Austin Matthews, but is he going to go out there and slide and block a Zdeno Chara slap shot at the expense of a shattered ankle?
No.
No, because he knows he's too valuable to do it. He knows he can't go down with an injury. Mitch Marner knows he can't go down with injury. John Tavares knows he can't get hurt. These guys know they can't get hurt. So they're not going to do it. Ryan Callahan knew he couldn't get hurt. He did it anyway. It's a lead by example kind of thing, and nobody on this Toronto team is going to do it. Nobody's going to lay down the bond. No one's going to go out there and throw that hit. Callahan will go out there and throw that hit, and he'll scrap. He's not a fighter, but he'll rough you up. He'll go out there and he's a gamer. That's it. Nobody on this Toronto team there's no gamers on this team. Nobody's going to go out there and change the complexion of a game.
Well, you can't quantify things like grit and sandpaper because, specifically, let's talk about playoffs, right? 7-game series. How many, mystery advanced analytics points do you give a hit in game 1 that, or the 10 hits in game 1 that a guy like Callahan throws that are causing body soreness in game 7? How do you quantify that?
Right, you can't.
But what you can quantify, it was the eye test, is this roster has no bite. I mean, nobody's afraid to play the Toronto Maple Leafs at all. You shut down the speed, you shut down the pass to the middle. What do they got?
Once you slow them down and you clog the neutral zone on them, the transition falls apart, the team falls apart, and then once you start forcing turnovers, they can't defend well, and you know that. Yeah, they have Frederik Andersen, who's one of the best goaltenders in the league, but he's not going to stop all the shots.
Especially not when he doesn't trust his defense anymore. I mean, let's compare this team to, the New York Islanders, right? Pound for or player for player, this Toronto Maple Leafs team is way more skilled than the New York Islanders by a wide margin. Arguably, on the back end, the New York Islanders are not very talented almost at all. I mean, you've got Adam Pelech, Scott Mayfield, and I love him, but a young Devon Toews playing in your top four. Not very highly skilled guys. Ryan Pulock, not really a skilled guy. He's a big body with a hard shot. He's not really going to make a move and beat you. He's not a Morgan Riley type guy. But the Islanders are the best defensive team in the league. Why? Because they buy into the defensive system. They have big, heavy defensemen. Almost all their defensemen are over 6'2". They're hard to play against. This Maple Leafs team, you throw the puck in the corner, you know you're going to win that puck battle. You throw the puck at the front of the net, you know you're going to box out the defenseman and get the rebound. It's just...
They don't pass the eye test. You can tell me, Tyler Dubas can sit down right here in this room and talk to us if he wants and explain all the advanced analytics and the fancy stats to us, and I will still tell him to his face he built the roster the wrong way because they're failing. I don't care what your advanced stats say, you're failing the eye test, and the eye test says everything.
Especially, I think, in hockey more than any other sport, you need that eye test. And what is the eye test telling you right now? They're soft. They're weak. They're easy to play against. And they have a roster of 9, 10, and 4 to show for it. In a division, arguably, not as competitive as the Metropolitan. They should be easily beating teams like Ottawa, easily beating teams like Detroit. I mean, not even, they should be beating teams like, no offense, the Sabres or the Panthers. Even though I like both those teams, and I think they're good teams now. But those are games you should be winning as the Toronto Maple Leafs, and right now they're just not. And
I mean... Even, think about, what's it called? I just totally lost where I was going with this. Oh, well, then let's talk about Pittsburgh. Let's bring Pittsburgh back into this. A Sidney Crosby-less Pittsburgh Penguins, roughed up, not very good in recent stretches, goes into Toronto. I don't remember if they went into Toronto or Toronto went into Pittsburgh.
It was at Pittsburgh, but...
Toronto goes into Pittsburgh and loses 5-1. Or 6-1 or whatever it was.
In front of a rookie goalie, by the way... First NHL start, you'd think if a team was ever going to get fired up for a win, it would be in front of a guy making his first NHL start, and they fed him to the fucking wolves. I'm sorry for my language, but they fed him to the wolves. I mean, they really did. They let this poor kid just get massacred. It just... I don't know. To
take a long story short, our concluding thoughts about Toronto is it's just it's a mess.
Let's conclude. If you had to assign percentages of blame to how much is this Dubas' fault, how much of this was the players' fault, and how much of this was Mike Babcock's fault, what percentage are you giving each of those pieces?
I'd probably give this a 60% Kyle Dubas because he had an obligation to either build a roster that played for Mike Babcock or remove Mike Babcock earlier than he did. So I think it's 60%. I think it's 15% Mike Babcock because he tried his best with a roster that wasn't exactly built to play for him, and then whatever's left, I'm not terrible with math, but whatever percentage is left
16,
over,
15 be 25%,
is left on the players because they can't, they just stop playing for him.
I agree. I would give this, I would say 50% to Kyle Dubas. I'll say 35% to the players, and I'll give 15% to Babcock. Babcock's not blameless in this because he had a chance to adapt to the roster he was given.
But he's been successful with this formula so many times in the past that why is he going to?
But I'm giving a majority of this to Kyle Dubas because he built, in my eyes, a flawed roster. Do I think this roster is hyper-talented? Yes, but are they built to win hockey games in the National Hockey League in 2019? Absolutely not. And I'm giving a good chunk to the players because they stopped playing. They gave up. I mean, you could see it on their faces. I went on that whole rant earlier about guys that gave up. Nobody cared. And that's not on Mike Babcock. That's on you.
Yeah.
You have to show up to the rink every night and play for your coach, play for your GM, play for your city, and they just didn't. So, yeah, I mean, to kind of sum it up, I think we're both in pretty much agreement that a large part of this falls on Kyle Dubas and the players.
I think we see pretty similar to this, that like he did Mike Babcock dirty here.
Yeah,
he really did. This isn't a situation like this wasn't like any other situation where like this wasn't like St. Louis with Mike Yeo, right? The roster was constructed. Mike Yeo could have coached this roster, and Mike Yeo was a bad fit, but the roster wasn't built
poorly
in contradiction of who was behind the bench. They were confident. Like even Mike Yeo was confident he can get that roster over the hump. It just turned out that they didn't respond to his coaching style, not his playing style. They didn't respond to the coaching style well, so he was fired, and they brought in Craig Berube, who's much more of a player's coach, and they responded. They didn't change much of the way they played. They still played a very similar heavy game. They just responded better to the coach. That's different than this, where they built a roster despite the coach they had behind the bench and had no regard for him at all.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And can they turn it around? I mean, I still expect this team to be a playoff team, but I don't expect them to go anywhere at this point.
I think it's going to be tough for them. I mean, I think they'll make the playoffs, but it's going to be tough. They're going to have to win a lot of games. They're going to win a lot of games in December and January if they're going to want to make up ground, because Montreal looks pretty good right now. I mean, they're chasing
Montreal,
Florida, Buffalo. They're even Tampa Bay. They're chasing.
Yeah, I mean,
they're not chasing Tampa Bay, but Tampa Bay's
2 points back, but they have 5 games in hand. So,
but let's just put it this way: the Ottawa Senators, a team that nobody, literally zero analysts are picking to go to the playoffs. We're not picking them to go to the playoffs. Professional analysts aren't picking them to go to the playoffs. Everyone's agreeing that this is a bottom-feeding team. Is only 1 point back of the Toronto Maple Leafs right now. That's embarrassing. If I was Toronto, I'd be embarrassed.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's...
Because especially when you have all this smoke being blown at you that you're the best team, you're going to be one of the best teams in the league, you're going to compete for a Stanley Cup, you're one of the most talented rosters in the league, and you're only 1 point ahead of an AHL roster, essentially.
Yeah, no, it's bad. And
a team with no goaltending, no forwards. They have literally it's Brady Tkachuk and Thomas Chabot, and that is the whole team. Yeah. And they are 1 point behind you.
I mean, that's bad. It's real bad in Toronto. Yeah, and I think you pretty much just hit the nail on the head and kind of summed it up the best way we can. Just take a look at the standings. So that's going to be it, unless you have anything last minute you want to add.
No, not really. I think that's it.
Last minute, I just want to add one thing regarding the Ottawa Senators. Bobby Ryan goes into the player help program. Bobby Ryan's a guy that I've personally been hard on over the years, but I do hope he comes out the other side of whatever issue he's facing, whether it be substance abuse or something else, for the better. I've been hard on him over the years, but...
Well, I think we've all been hard on him. I think it's just by nature of the contract he signed in Anaheim. I don't think... It's not the player's fault he's being overpaid. It's the team's fault. But he still has an obligation to live up to expectations, and he's not. So whatever. But yeah, we wish Bobby Ryan all the best with whatever he's doing. I mean, whether it's substance abuse, mental health, whatever he needs. That they said they're not going to comment on it anymore further than he got into the program, and that's honestly
totally respectable.
Yeah, they want to maintain some level of privacy for him.
So we hope that he comes out on the other side for the better. Next week, probably going to be doing quarter of the season mark stuff. Talk about league leaders, trophy races, all that kind of fun stuff.
Some fun stuff, yeah. It'll probably be a longer one.
Look at some quarter of the year stuff, some pretender contender sort of situations going on. We could even
honestly we could probably even look into some like trading partners, try to put together some big, theoretical blockbusters.
Trade baits and so next week's
matches for them,
Next week is going to be real fun. Might be a bit of a longer one, so I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be a lot of fun. So stay tuned and we will see you guys next time.